On today's episode of Inside the Numbers Sports Performance Podcast, we have Coach Dave McDowell. Coach McDowell is the lead performance coach at Brock University in Ontario, Canada. Dave, also known as DSM Strength, mostly known for his awesome YouTube channel full of sports science and spreadsheet templates and tutorials, runs a collegiate performance department at a very high level. He is one of the top minds in practical sports science, especially with low budget and low tech. In this episode, we discuss how Coach McDowell and his huge cohort of sports performance interns execute their day-to-day with collecting data from their athletes, leading to actionable insights for head coaches. We dive into the process of his RPE questionnaire, which is extremely interesting, collected after all physical sessions, and how the data from it has shown to be invaluable for his head sport coaches. This episode includes talks about force plates, spreadsheets, performance testing, and much, much more. Thanks for tuning in, and let's welcome to the show, Coach Dave McDowell. Welcome to Inside the Numbers, the Rock Daisy Sports Performance Podcast with your host, Coach Cody Hughes. Join us to unlock the secrets behind athletic performance as we break down the metrics and transform your collected data into powerful, actionable insights. Tune in for exclusive interviews with top coaches and professionals who are revolutionizing their training programs with data. If you love what you hear, please share it on X, Instagram, and YouTube, and tag us at RockDaisyAMS. Dave, what's going on, man? I appreciate you coming on the show.
Hey, Corey, man. Hey, Cody, man. Thanks for having me on here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Hey, I mean, I feel like I've known you forever, but technically, I guess, but not, from social media and all. And then finally this summer, we got to meet in person at the Sportsmith Speed Conference in Pittsburgh. So, it's always cool when you get to meet your social media friends in real life,
Yeah, I mean, likewise, I followed you kind of from afar from a long time. And then finally there was a conference that was close enough to the border where I could kind of get across and get down to something big enough where everyone was going to be. And it was great to finally meet you and shake hands and all that and talk shop.
Yeah, no doubt. Honestly, I had no idea for the longest time you were in Canada, not even in the States.
Yeah, I guess you just figure that everyone's kind of down where you guys are.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but anyway, man, if people don't know who you are and you're a strength coach, I think that's crazy. Because if you guys don't know Dave, his YouTube channel, DSM Strength, has just popped off. And probably one of the biggest valuable thing you've given to this industry, outside of what you do in your building every day, is providing the tutorials to create dashboards and try to give coaches some skills that basically give them some sports science basics and foundations. Where did that come from? Like, when did you decide to embark on that journey? One, learn the skills, and then two, share it with the world for free via YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, so it's kind of a long journey, to be honest. When I was first coming out of university, my first strength and conditioning job was at a private strength and conditioning facility, and we had probably zero budget. Myself, personally, I'm kind of a logic or a mathematical nerd. So I saw different softwares and ways of doing things, and I figure how can we do this on basically zero budget? And I had some spreadsheets on my laptop, so I started kind of tinkering away at stuff and trying to reverse engineer some sort of testing report that we could kind of use to differentiate ourselves from kind of the gym down the street. So then fast forward, I was there about 9 years, and then fast forward, I got a job at Brock University where I am now. And one of the things I was tasked with right away was kind of developing some reports and stuff for our sports performance department there. And then for anyone who's not familiar, we have a pretty robust internship. So we have about 50 undergraduate students that take a strength and conditioning internship through our performance department. We place 3 to 5. Yeah, it's a lot. We place 3 to 5 with each team that we work with. But essentially, I got tired of answering one-on-one Excel questions with 50 people. So I just started making videos of it so that I could just send them the video and then putting it out on YouTube because it was the only place to host videos. And then that virus that we won't really talk about kind of happened, and everybody got kind of trapped inside for a long period of time. Wasn't really sure if I was going to have a job on the other side. So start putting stuff together. And I mean, it kind of just fed itself, and it challenged me to try to do more and more and see what people would kind of like. And it's sort of taken on a life of its own, which has been pretty cool, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's very cool. I mean, I know I've used it, multiple times. I mean, that wild virus we don't talk about kind of sparked me on my own journey too. And I remember very specifically like the first one I ever built, whether that's a dashboard or a programming system, and thinking about going to YouTube to try to find how to, one, learn a formula, stack the formulas, right? And then eventually make it to where it's a little more dynamic, where it knows how to respond to multiple different things. And learning the language and all of that. I mean, I bet, golly, the amount of time I spent, on YouTube doing all of that. And now the emergence of Chat GPT with spreadsheets. Have you started looking into that at all?
So, yes, I haven't really used it as much on the spreadsheet side of things. I'm comfortable enough kind of there to make that happen. I've since taken up coding, so
Really?
it's kind of the next evolution. What's that?
What language?
A little bit of R, and I've dabbled in some other things, but mostly R. So I'm using ChatGPT more for that side of things these days.
Got it. So what intrigued you to start going on that side? I mean, obviously my first hunch is, because like I even experienced this myself, like I kind of got to the point where I felt like I was breaking Google Sheets.
Yep.
Not really breaking it, but like it wasn't meant to handle that type of volume of computations. And obviously the languages of software are way more powerful. Is that what happened to you? Or just you have different endeavors?
Yeah, I mean, the spreadsheets kind of do almost anything that you can kind of throw at them a little bit, but it just got to be like large. And when I was sharing it with other people, like they were breaking them and not really knowing how to work them as well. And then I spend more time kind of tech supporting stuff than actually sort of doing it. And then like as I kind of kept going down the road, my statistical curiosity kept getting bigger and bigger, and I just wanted to kind of move on to the next thing. So, I mean, enough people were talking about R on social media that it's time to kind of check it out and see what it's all about. And I was able to take a few graduate courses at the university that I'm at and kind of start down that journey. And I'm still not proficient, but I'm a little bit dangerous.
So I don't even really know what R is, other than what I've seen coaches like you and other coaches kind of mention it, or PhDs, statistics, things of that nature. If you were to like, how would you explain R to somebody like me that doesn't even really know what it is?
Yeah, so it's if you imagine like writing formulas in Google Sheets, it's kind of like that once you sort of learn the language. So it's a separate language, the same way you have to learn kind of the formula language of Google Sheets. But everything works sort of in variables, and you can capture everything in like essentially named ranges or named kind of matrices the same way you would in Sheets. But then you can keep referring to those things over and over again. And you just have this console where you would write all of your kind of code out, and then basically you can import your data in, and it's really good for kind of cleaning up large data sets and making sure that they're sort of usable, and you're not point and clicking. You're working with thousands of lines at one time. It's like take all of the periods out of a data set, for example, and things like that. So it just makes really large tasks a lot simpler. And then with the addition of something like there's different packages that do different things that you load into it. So there's one that's called Shiny, and you can essentially create web apps. So I'm just on the kind of the verge of that, but I've created some simple web apps where kind of store all the data in something like a Google Sheet, and then it updates to a web app where you can just sort of track someone's Macs or whatever else.
Okay.
And it kind of works that way.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. So now, how long have you been at Brock at this point?
Since 2016. So
2016.
What's that, like 8-9 years?
Yeah.
Something like that.
So you've been there quite a while, and you've got a pretty big department. I mean, if you got all those interns, it gives you some manpower to do some things.
Yes.
And having a passion for sports science, I really want to hear how you guys are using that in the day-to-day. of of at Brock, and what maybe there's a couple things that really move the needle that maybe your coaches really like, as far as maybe reporting, and then also helping maybe the listener understanding, and me too, like your workflow, like, because that's the biggest key, is rhythms and flows with getting involved with this data, because there's so many different ways to handle it and manage it. Like, for example, for me to kind of relate to you with my situation, I use data anywhere from manual entry and pen and paper all the way to a full-on API to an AMS. So, and trying to get all that in one place can be difficult, especially if you don't have tools or software. So, curious to hear, kind of like the daily rhythms at Brock using, in the sports science realm.
Yeah. So for a little bit of context, we have currently 3 full-time strength and conditioning coaches. We've had as many as 4, but one's moved on to the pros, which we'll probably be figuring out what to do with the 4th role in a little bit here. But along with the 50 kind of undergraduate interns, each of us are tasked with a subsection of sports. So myself personally, I work in rugby and volleyball, and then I've just picked up wrestling actually this year. Those are my sports. So in terms of our data, our budget's relatively low comparative to maybe a US college. So we have, like, things that are tough for us is anything with cloud subscriptions, because our budgets can change year to year. So we tend to try to stick to things that don't necessarily have subscriptions associated with them where possible. All of our kind of workout entries go through Team Builder, which has been great on the athlete side of things. It has its own set of challenges on other sides of things, but you can export some raw data and do some things with it there. So that's something that I'll do if I'm looking at some of the strength and conditioning data. But after that, pretty much everything is kind of custom created by sort of myself and our other strength and conditioning coaches, variations of stuff that we've been working on. So when we're doing a testing event, we have 8 or 9 sort of interns helping us out, or student coaches, and they're all on their laptops, and we're all inputting stuff into the same Google sheet. So like, where that's been great for us in terms of it's free, it's usable, so we can all enter stuff into the same sheet. We're actually a OneDrive school, so we have to use Microsoft, which is frustrating. So then I actually have to migrate stuff to
Google driven, to have it all in one place.
Yeah. So then I have to migrate stuff to Excel a lot of the times to make sure that that we're hiding sensitive data, that sort of thing. So we have a lot of manual entry that way. We do have a set of Hawk and Dynamics force plates that we'll export kind of CSVs from. I've created some APIs that link up to different things through that. And then other than that, like, a lot of the stuff is manual entry. So if you have enough humans, you can kind of just keep throwing people at it till it kind of gets done, which is nice. And then in terms of visualization and all of that, I've created some different dashboards, obviously through Google Sheets, that we'll use in sort of weekly meetings with sport coaches, sports medicine, myself, sometimes other key stakeholders when it's necessary. And we go through things like RPEs, we go through things like wellness questionnaires, we go through sort of what our load plan is for the year, and are we on track, or are we off, or where do we have to go from there?
Okay, well, hey, let's pause there and let's talk about a couple of those things. So, like RPEs, for example, talk me through how you're using that and where you're using it, collecting it.
Yep.
Things of that nature.
So I collect through a software called Tally, which is a free form software, kind of the best I've ever found. So basically how that works is inside of Team Builder, there is a note that has a link to the Tally form that I want them to fill out, and it just says fill this out every day. We get our athletes we try our best to get our athletes to fill those out after everything physical. Anyone who's collected RPs knows that can be kind of tough. How we're using that, though, is as a staff at the beginning of the year and kind of on a somewhat weekly basis, we go through and we plan out our practices. Basically, this is going to be high, moderate, low. We use kind of an RPE-ish system. Each coach is a little bit different, but then we use the RPs coming in from the students to kind of calibrate. If I'm thinking that I'm applying a 5 out of 10 or a moderate session to somebody, but the whole team comes back and they're like, we were crushed after that. Like there's a miscalibration there, and I'm not reading the situation well, or there's a workload issue, or there's something else we got to explore there, because we shouldn't be kind of that far off what I'm trying to apply to them and then what they're experiencing.
So with that, this is basically like a low budget, low tech version of being able to track practice loads.
Yep.
So whenever you're tracking these variables, you're getting RPE from the athlete. What else are you having to like make sure the variables are in play? For example, like duration of practice, or like time on feet. Is there anything else like part of that equation?
So yeah, so each of our teams do things a little bit differently. Like volleyball will try to track jump numbers. Rugby is mostly kind of practice time, and then they estimate how much of the practice they participated in, comparative. So
The athletes
we would
themselves?
Yeah, as best as possible.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And anytime we're going to do an intervention, we've walked them through kind of what we're hoping to get out of it, why we're thinking we're doing it. And I have a staff member at most practices reminding them to kind of do it, which is important. But off of that, I'm taking kind of a differentiated RPE. So I'll take an overall value and I'll basically take 4 measures. So an overall RPE, how hard was it on your lungs, respiratory rate, breathing, etc. How hard was it mentally? And then how hard was it on your muscles, joints, etc. And then we're sort of looking at it a little bit more specifically. Like team said that they were fried from a muscular standpoint. It was relatively easy mentally, relatively easy respiratorily. So was that the goal of the session or not? And then we kind of just use it to audit our own processes to try to be ready for game day, basically.
Do you take RPEs through games too?
We try to, not through, but after, post.
That's what I meant. Yeah.
Post.
Through the season is what I was trying to say.
Yep. And then we use it for a little bit of top-up sessions and stuff here and there if someone didn't play a lot of minutes or anything like that as needed.
And you've seen pretty good success as far as compliance goes. I know you said sometimes it's tough.
Yeah, so it depends on the team. So right now, like we have a couple coaches that are really bought in, use the information. Like the athletes feel like it's having an effect on kind of what they're doing on a daily basis, and they see the value in it, and those athletes are generally a lot more bought in on it. Some coaches like never talk about it, and they don't feel like, the athletes don't really feel like it's having an effect, and admittedly those teams struggle a little bit to make sure that they're doing it. So it goes in waves. It depends on the captains on the team, the coach of the team, myself, how many times I can bug them about it, that sort of thing.
So I'm so curious because I feel like this could be really useful for a lot of people. So
it's easy.
Let's talk nuts and bolts on how the execution of it. So like, all right, you've got this form.
Yep.
Team Builder. Obviously every athlete's got access to Team Builder through their phone. Yeah. So they have a link. How often do they need to fill it out? Is it just after any dedicated session? You said, you mentioned daily though.
Yep. So RPs, we try to get them to do after anything physical.
Anything physical. That's right. You did say that.
Yep.
Okay. So you ask them to fill that out and they do, and it probably takes what, a minute? If that. The longer it takes, the less likely they are to do it. A lot of the times it saves their name in there, so they just have to pick sort of date of session, what it was, and then the 4 ratings out of 10. Date of session. What type of session?
Yep. So energy systems.
Like
it's just a drop down. Energy systems, movement, strength conditioning, game, practice.
Got it. Yeah. So that's one thing I learned with the data is like, in order to be consistent, if you try to ask an athlete to type anything,
can't.
Their name, terrible. It's not going to be the same. You can't look things up.
You got to limit everything as much as you can.
Yeah, point and click, like my grandparents. You know what I'm saying? So that's very helpful. And then a 0 to 10 scale, you said?
Yeah, that's what I typically...
Got it. So, and all of that, I'm guessing, is integrated through... Does that form integrated into a sheet? I know a lot of times Google Sheets...
So it outputs... Yeah, it outputs to a Google Sheet. On the Google Sheet, there's different formulas to show like a green box beside someone's name if they've actually filled it out for the day. So I can just take a peek at it and say, hey, you, and you, what the heck you doing? You didn't fill out your forms today.
So you've got formatting for compliance. Did you or did you not? You built that out first.
Yeah.
Today's date.
That's all.
Here's the team roster. Basically green or red or yes or no.
Yeah. So it highlights green as long as there's an entry for them on that date. And then when they come into the weight room, if I'm waiting on it, I'll just throw that up on the TV, and they need to see their name go green before they do anything else.
Nice. Okay, another visual. Great. Then once you collect that data, I guess you're looking at it from a group average standpoint. Do you use, what type of statistics are you using here to kind of break that down?
Yeah, so a lot of our, so I'm trying to meet coaches where they're at. Myself personally, I'm looking at it on sort of Z-scores of average.
Okay.
So you're looking at like,
Hey Dave,
how far are we above or below sort of our average?
I was going to say, tell the listener what a Z-score is, because
Yeah,
not
so
everybody may know what it is.
yeah, so statistics kind of 101. If you imagine that all data sets are normally distributed, which they're definitely not, your standard deviation would be on either side of that about, 60-ish% of your data. And then you get to kind of at like plus or minus 3 Z-scores, it's like 99% of your data, something like that. If someone who's really good at statistics out there is going to fry me on that. But anyways, essentially, a Z-score is a measurement of how far you are away from the middle. Plus or minus 3 being the extremes.
Right on the average, right? You're middle of the road.
0 is average.
And if you understand the percentiles, 0 is 50th percentile, essentially. Right. If you're plus 1 standard deviation, it's whatever that percentile, 33-ish, 37. I don't remember what it is. But
percentiles and Z-scores don't necessarily equate because it spreads it differently, but that's a whole nother. Yeah. Anyways, you get the idea.
But you're using Z. That's just your,
that's how I'm using it.
You're looking at it.
The sport coaches generally like to talk in numbers. So like so-and-so was a 10 out of 10, or they were a 5 out of 10 or whatever. And they generally like to talk about it in that way. So like, I mean, that's the difference of like the sports science that I'm trying to do versus like speaking coach. Like you got to meet your coach sort of where they're at with that.
Sure.
And then, so we look at a few things. So we're looking at sort of, obviously team averages. We look at, by position a little bit. So did one position group get their butts kicked more than another? And then we look at it a little bit individual. Like if someone says they're a 10, like sirens are going off and flags are waving. Like, what are we doing with this guy right now? Because like he's telling me he's having the worst session of his life. So we got to figure out what's going on here and at least have a conversation with him. Okay. And we might need to recalibrate him or her to the scale and say like, hey, like when you say 10, like you might sit out of the next practice. Like you need to know this. Like this is not a joke. So
have you encountered some softies that's marking 10s? You're like, yo, that's not a 10.
Yeah, the best way I ever heard it put to me was that if you're going to introduce something like this, do it at the end of something like really hard, and say like that was a 10. And that was communicated to me as like anchoring yourself to the scale. And that was by I heard that at an NSCA conference by Patrick Ward. From the Seahawks at the time, and I was like, "That's pretty smart."
Yeah, that is.
We try to anchor everyone to the scales when we can.
Got it. Great, sweet. And I guess it's up to each coach, based off that. But the more data you collect, especially year after year, you kind of start seeing some trends, right? Because like that's the thing with data is that you've got a zoomed-in version of the data, which is like the day-to-day, but then you start seeing patterns. Is there any patterns you've picked up on over the years with RPE?
Yeah. So, admittedly, it's done better than others in certain years, so there's some gaps in the data. But I mean, every year around kind of our midterms and our exams, like we tank. Like people's ability to handle workloads just goes through the floor. So I mean, a younger me would have tried to train right through it and kind of and be like, yeah, like we're gonna train right through this. But now, kind of more experienced me, at times we're gonna back off during those periods of time and allow that mental stress to kind of take the place of some of the physical stress that we might be putting on people. So we might be kind of backing off on a lot of our volume and still trying to maintain a little bit of our intensity during those periods, understanding kind of what people are going through. I think what's interesting to see is that if we're actually able to practice properly, sessions that may have been kind of a 7 or an 8 out of 10, for example, at the beginning of a year, tend to become like a 5 or a 6 out of 10 by the end of the year if we've actually had some of the effects that we want to and actually been able to get people more robust to the work that they're kind of doing.
There you go. Good. I mean, I feel like that's evidence too of, coach can be like, hey, we're getting in shape. It's probably a very common phrase or, things of that nature. So Yeah, that's good stuff. Is there any, as far as, so RPE sounds like a more of a wellness, daily metric. Um, what are you guys tracking for performance gains?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I will mention that we do wellness as well. And I've had a lot of success with that. But from
Really?
a
Okay,
performance
yeah, let's
perspective,
stick there. Hold on, let's stay there then.
all right.
I didn't realize I kind of batch all in. RPE is more of exertion, I guess, of
Yeah,
load. Okay,
yeah,
now wellness, because I
yeah,
personally have had a terrible experience with wellness questionnaires. I'm like, this is a huge waste of time. I'm putting in a lot of effort for what? At the very least, I'm getting an exposure for an athlete to think twice about one thing, and they're going to go do what they want
yes,
anyway. So I'm
yeah.
curious to hear.
So yeah, so I think you have to be careful the team that you're trying to apply it to, because some teams, if you make them more aware of what they are, they become more of that. So if you're asking them to think about their wellness all the time, they generally start to think that they're more unwell than they maybe are.
Oh
So
yeah.
that's one experience, but a lot of the times I just look at it as an opportunity for them to have an open line of communication to me. Knowing that I have 6 teams that I'm responsible for, I don't necessarily have a chance to have a one-on-one conversation with everyone. So they rank everything from nutrition, sleep, stress, readiness to train, their mood, basically on a 1 to 5 scale. 3 being kind of their average. Like, I'm average today, I feel pretty normal. 5 out of 5 being I feel much better than average. 1 out of 5 being I feel much worse than average, or I ate much worse than average, etc. So if I'm looking across and we're all threes, like it's all systems go. But they also have an opportunity to tell me if anything feels particularly sore or tight or whatever that day, and then also leave a comment. So a lot of the times I'm looking at the comments and the sore areas and walking over to someone, well, maybe one of our staff members is leading warm up and saying, hey, you said your hip's feeling tight today, or your left quad or whatever. We got squats in our first block. Like, we want to work through that, or let's find something else that's more appropriate for you today. I mean, it's giving me a systemized way for them to communicate to me what's going on, and then for me to make some adjustments on that. My rule that I try to abide by, I'm not perfect at it, is to try to have even a 30-second conversation with each athlete about their wellness quickly. Hey, you said sleep was a 1 out of 5 today. Like, do you want some more strategies, or was it just a bad night? And then they at least know that I'm looking at it and I'm looking out for them. I have another sheet that I look at that just basically gives me the trend of the last however many days I want to see. And if something's like, say, nutrition's consistently off, then we're gonna have an intervention there and give them some more resources, or get them some help in some way, or find ways to get them what they need. So it's an opportunity for them to kind of communicate to me what's going on. So that's the wellness piece. And then performance wise, one of the big pieces of tech that we leverage is a set of force plates that we were able to kind of get, and it's sort of our one subscription that we can afford to pay for on a somewhat regular basis.
Okay, so you've decided to pay for force plates. With you've got a big staff, which is good. Manpower, but this may be something we stick on for a minute, because I have force plates too, and I often get extremely overwhelmed. So I'm here to learn, my friend. So let's
Yep.
hear it. How are you getting value out?
Yep. So a couple things off of the plates. We had a pretty nerdy staff, and it was kind of when force plates were kind of in vogue, and they've kind of gone out, and then they're back, and then they're back in again. But we decided that was a piece of tech that we wanted to invest in. So essentially, pretty much most of our sports, mine specifically, would do between 2 and 3 counter movement jumps at just about every strength conditioning session. The big things that we look for, one, it's a way to track body weight without having someone to actually weigh in every day. And it sounds kind of ridiculous that you're going to buy a $5,000 sort of body weight scale, but it's sort of a covert way to do that. And with different athlete populations, it's kind of useful to have that happening on a somewhat regular basis without them necessarily understanding that it's happening. I've told them all, but they don't really kind of remember that that's something that we look at. We obviously look at counter movement jump height. I think height's important. We want to know what the output metric is. It's probably more important with something like volleyball than it is with rugby, but it is something that we do. We use that to drive competition from time to time, so we'll throw a leaderboard up and try to get people fired up. to try to kind of compete on that. And then a few different metrics that I'll look at is one, I'll look at time to take off. So I just want to see how fast someone initiates their movement and gets off the plates. And then the other one I'll look at is counter movement depth, sometimes called eccentric dip or eccentric depth. And essentially what I want to look at there is just how low does somebody need to go in order to kind of create or their jump. So there's a few different things off of that. All things considered.
Oh, it's good. I got questions.
Yeah.
So the time to take off, when you're cueing them on their counter movement jump, so one, are they going hands on hips or dowel behind the?
Yeah, hands on hips,
Okay.
and the only words that our staff members are allowed to say is jump as high and as fast as possible.
Got it. Okay, so they're still trying. They understand that high and fast is the goal. So
yeah, we've tried to standardize cueing as best we can.
Awesome, very very big deal. Yeah, I think that
Yep.
I made a big mistake early with that, trying to over cue and realize that when the strategy changes, the data changes. When you have something as nice as a force plate,
and I communicate to the athletes. They're like, well, should I dip lower or should I try to jump faster or whatever? I was like, I want you to just jump however you think you need to do to accomplish the task, because anything you do is telling me something about you as an athlete that I need to know so I can do a better job for you.
Great point. Because I think I get those same questions from athletes. You know, like we did a ton of jumps today on our new. We've got the OVR jump that we're doing to get a ton of jumps in, some feedback, and I had a kid that was trying to PR like crazy. He was getting clean. He's like, Coach, what do I need to do? And I was like, man, I don't know. You're going to figure out that strategy as you go. You know, like your body should, you can make a very, I don't really want to say or make a claim that there shouldn't be technical coaching at some point, because obviously like there are jump coaches, you know, that to leverage certain strategies. But I think the one that the body wants to use, it's going to use it. And then maybe the data you see from that is my next question, leading into the eccentric depth or the, you know, counter movement depth. Does that give you a little bit of an indication if somebody is a little more elastic driven or muscular driven?
Yeah, I mean, that's in vogue right now, right? Is people are trying to read traces and figure out if we're elastic or muscular. And I think what you can kind of figure out is if that's the terminology we want to go with, for sure, we can. But I mean, we both have the athletes that have to kind of dip really low and potentially try to recruit a whole crap ton of muscle mass to try to jump real high, and then the ones that just sort of pop off the plates and kind of fly right up in the air. I think what it tells me, we use it as a little bit of a measurement of fatigue. So if, from my understanding, the body's pretty good at protecting outputs. So if you have someone that's we work in meters, but if you have someone that's, say, a 30-inch jumper, and they're a quick jumper, let's say, they get off the plates relatively quick, they don't dip very low, and then they're feeling a little bit more fatigued, and all of a sudden they jump a little bit slower, they're creating a little bit more impulse, they dip a little bit lower, but they're still getting that 30. But that's still, their strategy on how they've had to do that has changed a little bit. So it's giving you a little bit of an indication that potentially their nervous system might be a little bit more tired or something to that effect. Their strategy's changed as a result of some of the load that's been put on them. So those are kind of the red flags that pop up for me. Like, why are strategies changing?
So like my thought process goes, if I see that, and just, you can give me your thoughts if it's different or echo it, is that if somebody's typically quick, you know, and reaches a certain height in a less amount of time, maybe they're still getting to that jump height. And if you just strictly took jump height, you may go, well, nothing's changed. But because it took longer, because generally, you know, the highest and fastest outputs require the most organization and firing of the system. And if the system's fatigued at all, you can still find a way to get to those outputs. It just takes a little longer and slower, but high forces that are slower can be done under fatigue. That's why you can see people still hit like squats or bench presses that are heavy, even if they're tired. You know, they can still hit that number, but they're probably not going to hit any power numbers if they're really fatigued. Does that
right?
Is that congruent?
Right, because to create the impulse, they just need more time, right? Because it's the force and the time. So if the force isn't quite as high, they need a little more time potentially.
Right.
So
and when we say impulse, like I think I read Dan Cleaver's or Cleather, Dan Cleather's book, Force, like 7 times before I could even try to absorb it, because it's really good.
Yeah.
But understanding physics from like if you have a time curve, right? So you got time, and then upwards is how much force.
Yep.
Essentially, impulse is the area under the curve.
Right? Yeah,
Right?
during the propulsive, from my understanding.
Yeah. During the propulsive.
So like to
Positive.
get someone to jump higher, you need more forces quicker, or kind of like more like force applied for longer.
Yeah.
Right, and that there's kind of two ways there. So if they're going after sort of the time variable, they're trying to apply things a little longer. They just maybe don't have it in the system to jump real fast that day.
Good points.
But they can still get the output, right?
Right.
So like cool. Those are the types of things. And I try to keep it simple on purpose. Like you could drive yourself crazy with force plate metrics. There's so many, right? Mm-hmm. And people create them all the time. But for the most part, those ones aren't calculated. Like jump height is calculated, obviously, but time to take off is just a measurement of time, and eccentric depth is kind of how low they're going. So they're not as variable, which is important. If we're looking in a return to play scenario, there's other things that we might kind of go down the rabbit hole. And then general, like if your training is working, you want to probably see maybe jump height change, or maybe jump height doesn't change a whole lot, but the athlete's weight changes. So, and that might be the outcome you were looking for, or potentially they start jumping faster, and that might be a positive adaptation for that athlete.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives you an idea of kind of how your training is having an effect on people too. And you should see the strategies maybe evolve a little bit if your training is doing what you think it's doing, or they're getting better, let's say.
Yeah, see, I love that concept, because when you think of, I mean, that's what tech does, in my opinion, is that it gives you better ways to see what's happening. Because in a very traditional strength conditioning setting with very low tech, and all you can kind of see is like, hey, did maxes go up or not? Did broad jumps go up or not? No, did jump mat verts go up or not? Sometimes you may maybe freak out if things aren't happening, or if things go down, but you don't really know why. You know, I know I've fallen to, hey, this guy's sprint numbers, I've gotten a little slower. I'm like, do you realize the kid gained 25 pounds over the entire winter?
Yep.
But he only lost about, 1% of his speed. Yep. That's probably a win. And then I learned the momentum metric, and you go, oh, there's an easy way to see it. The only thing is you got to pick the right tech. This is an excellent segue here. Like, you got to pick the tech that works for you, instead of just trying to think you got to get the most shiny thing. And I think this is a problem anyway, with all the way the trickle-down effect from the NFL to college football to, I mean, there's stories of college football programs spending 5-6 figures on tech that they actually don't use. It's just a recruiting tool, you know? So I want to hear what you have to say about, purchasing tech and making sure it's the right fit.
Yeah. So, I mean, the precipice of the kind of the YouTube channel in a way was that coaches are swimming in data with no idea what to do with it. And the problem kind of, at least in my mind, is that there's no shortage of tech pieces, and they're becoming more affordable, and more, your average coach is able to get their hands on it a little bit more. If you just look at something like force plates, they're not $50,000 to $100,000 in a lab anymore. They're a few $1,000, and you can have them in your gym, like within a week, kind of shipped to your door. So with that, feel like obviously there's the recruiting piece. If you need to buy stuff to get people to come to your school so you get the best athletes, like maybe that's a net positive. I don't know. But I think where coaches struggle is before they buy something, they don't necessarily have a true question or something that they want to get out of it in mind. And it kind of comes back to the idea of sports science, right? It's kind of applying the scientific method to sport. So in the scientific method, you make some sort of an observation, and then you figure out, like, what is a question that I actually want to try to answer? Is it when I squat, I don't know, fast, like, did vertical jumps go up? Or when I, like, this third of people seem to be the best on the field, what qualities do they have that the rest of the people don't have? Like, there's different kind of questions, and I don't think enough coaches really start at a question or figuring out what they want to get in mind. They start at the piece of tech, and they buy a laser timing system or a force plate, and then they're like, well, what's the metric? I can't tell you what the metric is. It has to do with whatever the question you're trying to answer is.
Good point.
Like, I can't tell you that, like, what people's vertical jumps are if the question you care about is sprint times. Like, it's a different world. So what I would caution the average coach about is really take some time and sit down and figure out what are the things you need to know about your people. And I tell our students it's about answering it depends. So often, like the ifto facto answer that coaches give is, well, it depends. Well, who does it depend on? Why does it depend? What situations does it depend on? Like, you need to be the expert of the people you work in. So you got to figure out what those questions are, and then get your tech to answer that. And then you actually have a strategy in place that you're going to try to use it for. And then the piece of tech that you need actually becomes very clear what you need, because, well, shoot, I want to measure this, so I need something that measures that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know I felt privy to that. I finally got to a place where I had some resources and thought, I mean, I remember the actual journey from one, realizing sprinting was probably good to do.
Yeah.
I was all lifting for a long time.
Yeah.
Lifting and conditioning, speed work, whatever. And then, okay, but now we need to sprint. Okay, well, we're sprinting, but we're not. Are they running hard? Okay, put a stopwatch on. Try to give them feedback, and then try to collect the info, and then try to make it a little more standardized with lasers, but still hand recording. Because I did that for 2 years. I had a laser timing system, but I wrote down every single one, which took a lot of time. But I'll circle back to why I think that's valuable, and then to the point where now all of our sprinting is pretty much automated through like a cloud system, where every single one gets captured and automatically dropped into a dashboard, ready to be analyzed or already analyzed for us, which is really cool. But going back to that, everybody wants to try to get away from manual entry or like, hey, this takes way too much time. And I understand that. Like, I completely understand. Like, if there's any way you can buy more time for you to do higher level work, of course, like, I totally get it. But I mean, if you got 50 interns, maybe not. You got you've got all that manpower. But I know when I was handwriting every time, and it was just me, had no assistant, I knew those times like the back of my hand. Like, they were absolutely just, I could tell you what athlete ran what I felt like good was, bad was. And then as soon as I started delegating some of those things to interns, assistants, and then eventually making it fully automated, I didn't realize how distant I'd get from the data.
Yep. And then if you have to talk to a coach about it, you don't truly know your athlete maybe the way you think you do. And you're like, hold on, let me look that up. And then it's like, aren't you in the room with them every day? Like, you need to know some of these things. And then you also don't know if one slips by that they tripped the laser early, or they used their arms on a jump, or something silly happened where maybe you didn't see that rep and know that it was 25% outside of their normal. It's like, oh, there's something wrong there.
Yeah.
So you have to have those checks and balances in place to know what the heck's going on there.
I've ran into that issue to where I'm already a few steps removed, even a few days removed, and go, hey, that ain't right. And then go, well, now I've got to track down all the way back to date, who it was, when the rep was, clean that data, refresh. And that's even more time too. So at the end of the day, you got to pick your poison. And if you're going to,
and then hopefully there's no coaching decisions being made off of any of that too. Like, is so-and-so playing this weekend?
Oops, coach. Hey, coach, by the way, I made a mistake. That was wrong.
Yeah.
They don't
So-and-so actually passed their fitness test.
Yeah. You assigned them more conditioning when I thought, no, they actually passed.
Yeah.
That's not good.
That happens.
But I mean, if those things are going to happen, I get it. Now, what type of checks and balances do you have in play to help you try to fight against that or try to minimize that?
Yeah. So, I mean, we hand record a lot of stuff. Obviously, we have a little bit of manpower. It's a slightly different system. But then, I mean, you should just sort of plot everything real quick and just sort of look at it visually. And if you have a little bit of historical data, like, you can calculate some percent changes off of, like, this is where they were before. And I mean, your spider sense has to start tingling if they've made crazy improvements in something and you're not really sure. And then you also have to just make sure that your protocol is airtight as best as possible. And we run into that, obviously, with a lot of manpower also comes potentially new people running your test every year. So, like, that's adding error to the test, where that's on me to do as best as possible to educate those humans on how we need the test run. And why it's very important that if you're running a chin-up test, for example, that this is the exact way we run it, and these are the standards that have to be in place, because there's people trying out for teams, and they're maybe making or not making a team based on their kind of performance in some of this stuff. And it's ultimately really important that you kind of do all that and standardize as much as you can.
Really good points. And I can see where you have to, as the lead coach or the head coach, you probably have had to really reflect and think, how am I teaching these, interns or assistants to do it at the highest level? That way you can duplicate your eyes. How difficult has that been? And I'm sure you've improved on that over time.
I mean, it's always a work in progress. It kind of depends on the crop of humans you have each year. And we have staff meetings quite regularly to kind of go through all of these things. And then we workshop stuff if it's coming up and we know we're going to have to do it. And mistakes are still always made, because you're also, you're teaching young coaches how to do their job. And that's important, right?
100%.
And truthfully, not all of the students in our program want to go on and be strength conditioning coaches. Some of them are just doing it for something to do in university. Some of them do end up wanting to become coaches. Some want to be teachers. They want to be physios, chiros, OTs, whatever. So they don't necessarily kind of connect the dots of how important some of these things are at times.
Yeah, no doubt. No, that's really good. I don't know why this is just sticking on my mind, because I run into this issue back to the force plates. When you say that, are your athletes come in and jump before every strength conditioning session? I've tried to do that before.
Yep.
And I felt like it was a massive time suck. How have you been able to make that efficient?
Yeah, I mean, there are exceptions that sort of need to be made in terms of you can't standardize everything perfectly. You understand that some error is going to creep in there somewhere. So when I program, I generally program it in blocks where we'll have some sort of prep stuff, and then we work through our power work first. As soon as we kind of jump into power, athletes start making their way over and kind of doing it during that. So it's intersession.
Okay.
While they're on a break or something, because it just didn't work well for us to try to make sure everybody did it before the session. As long as it gets done sort of before they leave the room, we're going to take it as best we can.
I like it. Sweet. I think that's what I'm going to do now, because now I'm trying to include my force plates back into it now that we're doing a bunch of jumping and sprinting, and trying to see some of those metrics like you mentioned of strategy differences and things like that. If you can just find a way to, I would like to try to teach my kids how to do it, man it themselves. If it's a station, it's the software makes it really easy, whether it's Hawkins or Vault or whoever.
Yep.
To be able to do that, I've got to get better at teaching them how to do it.
Just make it A3 in your card. That's it.
Very good point. There's two questions I always ask coaches, whenever I interview them, and I just think it's really important in a critical thinking exercise. Is the first one is, what is one thing you've changed your mind on over the course of?
It's a few things. I think not trying to control everything. I think I used to be a little bit more controlling and think that kind of my programming was not, I don't want to say the be all and end all, but I had kids that or athletes that still wanted to go to kind of the student gym and use the student gym a little bit and do other things. And I think that you have to nurture those people a little bit more than kind of get mad at them for wanting to do more. And it's kind of funny, if you kind of hear these stories about some of the best people in every sport, they were always a little bit weird, probably did way too much. And they were the guys that woke up at 4:30 and did their hundreds of reps, or they ran the hills till they couldn't do anything. And I don't know how many bodies are left along the way from people who didn't make it and do those things. But I think you probably gotta want to do more if you're going to be special. So I try to nurture those and just in some cases put some rules on it where hopefully it doesn't affect anything we're trying to get done, and just point them in the right direction to be effective.
Yeah, love that. Love that. And then the second question is, what is your current thing you're trying to work on or work through or learn more about? Hey, I'm just, this thing right here is what's currently got me obsessed about, trying to learn more about, trying to refine. You already mentioned, you're trying to learn some R, so I know you've mentioned that. But is there anything else that you're trying to dive?
I mean, coding's always in the background just because it's something we're chipping away at. Two things. So I'm working on another master's degree right now.
Oh,
through the school that I work at. Luckily, it's a little bit funded and it's taking way too long. But the research question I'm going to try to dig into is how athletes respond to different types of reports, in terms of, like, is it, I don't know exactly the metric or the way that I'm going to break it up yet. It might be kind of tables versus charts, or different types of charts versus each other, and it'll be sort of a crossover where they each get a type of report, then the next testing they get the opposite type of report and some sort of interview, with the goal being that oftentimes I'm tasked of designing these things for people, and I want to be able to say, like, I've kind of looked at this, and this is the things that people actually respond to, and these are the things that if you want to tell this story, this is how the best practice to do that. That's probably the thing that in the background I'm kind of really thinking about. From a purely strength and conditioning standpoint, though, I was turned on to this idea of program auditing, which is essentially just tracking different metrics and then weighing it back against your program to see if it's having the effect that you want. So something is easy as, like, if I'm telling you I'm in a power phase, is power actually changing while we're in this phase? Like, are we actually having an effect on it? And are we tracking it week to week to make sure that we're having an effect on it? And then if we find that this block of 4 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever, maybe it was 3 weeks after that the power actually got elevated, then we know that if we have an important competition or something coming up, we want to apply this 6 weeks out the next time as opposed to like 3 weeks out. So just always trying to be as objective as possible with the things that I'm doing, and it's always a work in progress.
Of course. I mean, I don't know a good coach anywhere that thinks they're finished. They're always a work in progress and constantly sharpening that sword. Well, keep me in the loop, man. I'm really interested on your master's degree research question. That is awesome. I think that you can dial down some, hopefully, I get it.
Yeah.
In time, but seeing you've already got a lot of hands-on experience with, because I know too, let's just hit on this one, like going back to the RPE, like you get that stuff. Do the kids ever see like the end result or any of that data, like maybe team data, or like, hey, like, is it just coaches? I'm curious if the athletes see any of it.
Yeah, so we've done it a few different ways. I used to print out a report for everybody and hand it back like a little bit after their testing days. So we test a handful of times a year. But now there's a few ways that we do it. I create everyone a folder and just stick their PDF in their folder every so often with kind of an explanation of what everything is. And then we do a presentation on how to read your report. And then they're able to book a meeting with me if there's anything that kind of is on the report that they want to talk kind of further through. That's kind of the main way we do that.
Sweet. Well, hey, last thing before we go, testing. What do you test?
Yeah. Oh, depends on the sport, but yeah. So I'll do kind of rugby because we probably test them the most often, just the way the season works. So 40-meter sprint, and I said meters. Of that, we're taking Canadian. Sort of a 10, a 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, and 30 to 40 split.
Pause. Okay. You get a lot of riff on this. How are you measuring it? With what?
I can mention companies. The arena gear.
For sure. I mean,
yeah.
So the arena gear, you're getting a 0.
Yeah.
What is the standard way? The flies are easy, laser to laser, but it's the static sprint that's the hardest to standardize.
We have a 0.5 meter start line.
Okay. So you're getting as close as possible that you can get consistency, but it's not true.
0.5 start line back.
Love it.
That's what our national sporting organizations do. Yeah, so we can compare our data versus kind of the national teams, which is great.
Well, then you got football guys over in the States trying to compare it to a hand start of a Brower, a big timer of the NFL combine. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. That's tough. That's really tough.
So I mean, I've gone through several versions of lasers, and then I finally just bought my own set of Dasher lasers because, as you can imagine, with testing equipment, by the time 50 people get their hands on it, it doesn't always work very well when you want to go use it. So we take 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, 30 to 40. Off of that, I take a few different things. So I'll calculate a sprint momentum over that first 10. I take a 10 split, and then I want to look very rudimentary. It's almost like a speed profile at which split they have their fastest 10, so that I can get an idea if they're kind of more top speed dominant, more acceleration dominant. And then we take the sort of calculate miles per hour off of that. So we do that. We'll take counter movement jump, non-counter movement jump, and
Force
I actually
plate?
use a, what's that?
Force plate or like jump mat? Because I don't
So
know.
actually I use a jump mat for those.
Got it.
The reason being, I already take the counter movements on the force plates in session, so I have an idea what those are. And I've taken jump mat jumps since I started there before we got force plates. So I have a historical data set there. So we just kept using the jump mats for those. We take a broad jump and a triple broad jump. The reason for the triple broad jump is just the maintenance of momentum and athleticism. So they 3 broad jumps in a row as far as you can with no pause. And that was stolen from the national team as well. It's a national team test. And then we do a beep test as their aerobic fitness test.
Okay,
so
talk me through. I mean, I've heard of beep tests mostly through soccer.
Yep.
I know that sounds terrible as a strength coach. I'm not super familiar with a beep test, but I've always been a football, basketball, and baseball strength coach. I've never trained soccer or people that are a little more endurance. But how do you run the beep test?
Yep. So it's a 20-meter shuttle run test. It's run to an audio track. Essentially, you run and run 20 meters. At the next beep, run 20 meters back, so on and so forth. You go for max levels. Max levels and shuttles. If you miss 2 in a row, you're out, and your score would be the last shuttle that you basically hit successfully. And we use that as a measurement of aerobic fitness, and off of that, we'll calculate basically a beep test score. The score being, because it's hard to do the math on it, like each level has a different number of shuttles. So if you run, say, like a 10-10, you would write, like most people would write it as like 1.1, but that's 10.1, and that, but when you're doing the math on that, doesn't really work all that well. So you basically just take the level and then do a percentage of how many shuttles out of the total number of shuttles as the decimal place.
Gotcha.
And I have a video on that for anyone who's kind of curious on that. And then we do sort of an in-body scale of body fat, weight, and lean tissue.
That's pretty great. I mean, I think that if you have, resources, I mean, a lot of that's low tech. I mean, beep test, you could probably find a beeper.
Super low tech.
Anywhere. Yeah, you got broad jump, triple broad. If you've happen to have a jump mat, great. But if not, use a piece of tape in a wall or a Vertex if you have one. A lot of times the sport coach is going to have a Vertex somewhere. If not, I think that's awesome. Good stuff. Well, hey, go ahead and tell everybody, Dave, if they don't know already, the resources you provide and places if they want to find you. Where can they find you at?
Yeah, so obviously my website, dsmstrength.com. So dsmstrength.com. I have a few things on there. So I sell, my business model has always been, I'll show you how to make something for free on YouTube. If you don't have the time, you can buy it. And that way kind of avoids piracy, to be honest. So then I run a sports science mentorship one time a year. That is sort of live. So we do 6 lectures around sports science basics, force plates, different pieces of technology. And then we have roundtable meetings. I got guest speakers that come and speak. There's an online community that's at 55 coaches and growing. That just, you basically get lifetime access to it, and you can kind of talk to coaches about sports science for as long as we decide to keep the community active, which is hopefully for a long time. And then obviously the YouTube videos and different spreadsheets for sale to help coaches sort of make action with the things they're collecting.
Awesome. Well, Dave, I appreciate you coming on, man. This is just jam-packed with a lot of great info. Good luck with the master's degree and everything, man. And
Thanks, man. Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.